A droplet clung to the rim of the glass, slowly sliding down and leaving behind a cold streak, like time itself, melting away second by second. Jack Thorne followed it with his eyes, then looked up toward the floor-to-ceiling window. Central Park lay beyond, still dusted with a fine layer of snow, like a peaceful painting hung on the wall. But inside the Astor Suite, that serenity felt like mockery. The thick Persian rug beneath his feet, the polished walnut table, the crystal chandelier, casting a soft glow, everything in the room was designed to impress, to assert power. Yet in this moment, each luxurious detail only made Jack feel like he was trapped in a gilded glass box with no exit. He twirled his fountain pen between his fingers, his jaw tightening until the muscles stood out. $4.8 billion, Jack thought. 3 generations of Thornes could live in comfort. My name would stand alongside Rockefeller. And yet, this Arab old man won't say a single word. Sheikh Khalid al-Jamil sat across from him motionless, like a statue. He wasn't even looking at the 100-page presentation Jack had poured his sleepless night into. He looked straight into Jack's eyes, a gaze that wasn't hostile nor friendly, just weighing. Jack hated that look. It made him feel exposed. All his life, he had fought to prove himself on Wall Street to the elite universities that once rejected him, to his father, who had once called him a foolish dreamer. And now he had to prove himself all over again to someone who hadn't spoken a single word. The room was so silent that the sound of a glass being set down rang out like a gunshot. Elena Ramirez, dressed in the cream-colored hotel uniform, quietly poured more coffee for the sheikh. She moved so lightly she didn't make a sound. Jack didn't look at her. To him, that hand pouring the coffee could have belonged to anyone. Just another invisible part of the scenery, like the table, like the chair. Elena retreated to the corner of the room, standing still as if she didn't exist. But in her heart, every line of dialogue, or rather every stretch of silence, was being recorded. How many versions of this moment had she witnessed in her life? The powerful, the dismissed, and the unseen. Jack cleared his throat, breaking the silence. Sheikh, I believe you'll find these terms highly attractive. But the words dropped like a pebble onto a frozen lake. Not a single ripple. Sheikh Khalid didn't answer. He gently turned the gold ring on his finger, his eyes still locked on Jack. It was a gaze without words, yet it spoke as clearly as if he'd said aloud, I didn't come here just to hear numbers. Jack swallowed hard. For the first time in years, he felt a hollow opening in his gut, and it had nothing to do with money. Behind him, Elena tightened her grip on the silver tray. She understood now. It wasn't the proposal that was falling apart. It was trust. Jack Thorne leaned forward, placing his hand on the thick stack of documents as if their weight alone could anchor Sheikh Khalid to his seat. An additional 1.5% equity for your fund, he said, voice steady but strained. And veto power over sustainability strategy. That's the final offer. A slow nod from the sheikh. No agreement, something else. His gaze shifted to the left, signaling one of his advisors in a white suit. The man bowed, and then the sheikh began to speak. In Arabic, it wasn't the monotonous tone of a politician. His voice was deep-textured, flowing like an underground stream. The words didn't feel like mere language, they were images, metaphors, emotions. From the corner, Elena held her breath. This wasn't a speech. It was a declaration, quiet, but weighty. The sheikh's voice was soft like desert sand at dawn, then suddenly sharp like a Bedouin dagger. Jack's 2 interpreters, graduates from Ivy League schools, started to falter. One furiously scribbled notes, while the other stammered, he says, we must build a boat. Together. His voice cracked, like he was trying to translate a dream he couldn't quite grasp. Jack frowned. What boat? Elena gripped the silver tray tightly, head bowed, but ears focused. She knew the exact phrase the sheikh had used. A boat remains steady only when its builders face the same direction. An old proverb and a veiled rebuke. The sheikh wasn't rejecting the numbers. He didn't trust the system, the treatment, the culture. One of the sheikh's advisors smirked, shaking his head as the translation fell apart, as if they were watching the clumsy act of a child trying to play grown-up. Jack felt sweat soaking through the back of his shirt. The hollow in his stomach had shifted from worry to confusion and now anger. He glanced around for support, but everyone was silent, even the lawyer, even the assistant. It was as if he was suddenly alone in his own boardroom. The sheikh concluded his address. He no longer looked at Jack. Instead, he placed both hands on the table and calmly closed his leather case. The click of the latch sounded like a gavel striking down in court. Jack opened his mouth to say something, anything, but his throat closed up. The sheikh stood. His movements were slow, but firm. His entire entourage rose with him. No one said a word. The door swung open. The sheikh stepped out his white robe, brushing the carpet like a passing ghost. Jack collapsed back into his chair. In that instant, he looked 10 years older. No one in the room dared move. And then, a voice spoke. Not loud, not harsh, but so clear it startled everyone. "Excuse me, sheikh." The voice came from a place no one expected, the furthest quietest corner of the room. From Eleanor Ramirez. "Excuse me, sheikh." The words sliced gently through the thick curtain of silence that had blanketed the room. Every movement froze. The door, still ajar from the sheikh's departure, remained half open. His entourage paused mid-exit. For a few suspended seconds, the world held its breath. All eyes turned toward the source of the voice, a place no one ever expected sound to come from. Elena Ramirez, the woman who had stood quietly like a piece of living furniture throughout the meeting, now stepped forward. Not hurriedly, not trembling, but her gaze, clear and sharp as a blade, was fixed directly on Sheikh Khalid. "Sir," she continued this time, in Arabic articulate, poised with a rhythm that was formal, humble, yet utterly confident. "If I may allow me to clarify the translation just given. In a room filled with people being paid thousands of dollars an hour to comprehend what had just happened, it was Elena, the one rendered invisible, who emerged from the shadows as the only one who truly understood." The sheikh tilted his head slightly. He said nothing, but his eyes narrowed, inquisitive, like a conductor, suddenly realizing that the anonymous percussionist understood the entire symphony. Jack's mouth dropped open. Part of him wanted to interrupt, another part couldn't look away. "Elena," he muttered, as if just now realizing she existed. Elena bowed gently, then turned to the sheikh. "You said that a boat remains steady only when those who build it face the same direction. That wasn't just a metaphor, it was a warning. That without mutual respect, any partnership, no matter how profitable, is destined to sink." She paused, then switched to English, slowly, clearly facing Jack. "The sheikh does not object to the financial terms. He objects to the absence of the principle of shura consultation. In his culture, sustainability is not maintained through numbers alone, but through consensus, trust, and dignity." A different kind of silence now filled the room, but this time it wasn't heavy with failure. It was stunned, as if a door had just opened, and an unfamiliar light came flooding in. Sheikh Khalid turned fully around. He didn't look at Jack, not at his advisors. He looked at Elena, and he held that gaze. He nodded. No words, but it wasn't the same silence as before. It was recognition from a man who thought he had seen all the world had to offer, now finding its rarest truth from where no one had thought to look. Across the table, Jack Thorne gripped the armrest of his chair. A chill ran down his spine. The woman he hadn't bothered to glance at once in the past 3 days had just unlocked a problem that his million-dollar team couldn't begin to reach. And for the first time since entering the room, Jack was no longer in control. "Who are you?" Jack's voice came out hoarse, as if he had just swallowed his own pride. The question didn't carry accusation or insult. It was raw astonishment, a crack in his logic crying out for explanation. Sheikh Khalid didn't wait for a translation. He asked in Arabic, his voice low and clear, "How did you come to possess this understanding?" Eleanor stood upright, not with pride, but with composure. She took a deep breath, her hands clasped in front of her stomach, as if holding together a memory too fragile to let slip. "I hold a master's degree in international finance from Columbia University," she said, in English directed at Jack. Her voice was steady, unshaken, full scholarship. She paused, then turned to the sheikh, switching to Arabic with a softer tone, almost confessional. "My father was an architect, a man who shaped buildings with the devotion of raising a child. But then came the 2008 financial crisis. He lost his firm, lost our home, lost his faith." Jack swallowed hard. Something in that story reached into a locked drawer in his heart, the one that held the image of a janitor father, calloused hands, a gruff voice laced with quiet shame. Elena continued now, facing Jack. Her eyes no longer held fear. "This job at the hotel. It's not because I lack capability. I do it to support my mother, who suffers from chronic arthritis, and to help pay tuition for my sister. She's studying biotechnology at NYU. No hint of self-pity, not a trace of blame, only calm strength and a dignity so steadfast it left one breathless. "I don't need anyone's sympathy, Mr. Thorne," she said. "I just want to keep a promise that my family will never collapse again. Not because of another crisis, not because of a system that refuses to see people like my father." The room, once a stage for multi-million-dollar presentations, had transformed into a chamber of truth. No more charts, no more data, only real people, real pain, and unseen sacrifice. Sheikh Khalid tilted his head slightly. He didn't offer praise. He had heard many reasons, read many flawless resumes, and listened to many moving stories. But this was different. This was the truth that needed no ornament. Jack Thorne leaned back in his chair, exhaling, as if he had just traveled a long road within his own mind. In his vision, the image of Elena in a hotel uniform began to fade, replaced by the figure of a woman standing at the intersection of two cultures, two worlds, and still holding on to herself, a housekeeper, not a warrior in quiet armor. The silence lingered heavy, like the morning fog that settles over Brooklyn's red brick rooftops, both hazy and biting. Jack Thorne sat motionless, as if someone had pulled the chair out from under the game he thought he was winning. But just then, a voice sliced through the air, the familiar voice of the man who had always stood beside him in board meetings, now laced with unmistakable contempt. Jack, his chief advisor, said, lips tightly drawn, "This is ridiculous. We're in the middle of a $4 billion deal, and you're letting a housekeeper interfere." The words landed like a slap across the face of a man already bowed. Elena said nothing. She simply stood, eyes downcast, spine straight. But Sheikh Khalid's expression darkened. No translation was needed. He understood perfectly. He turned to Jack, speaking in English, not loud, but sharp as steel. "The housekeeper you referred to, as if she were furniture, has demonstrated more cultural intelligence, integrity, and self-respect than your entire team has in the last 3 days." Then he turned to Elena. "Ms. Ramirez, if you would agree, I would like you to assist us moving forward. With fair compensation, of course. Murmurs rippled through the room. One of Jack's legal aides shot her head up, then immediately bent to take notes. The atmosphere shifted. A tide was rising, not one of doubt, but of redefined power. Every eye turned to Jack. He didn't speak, not right away. In his mind, a voice screamed, "No, you're the CEO. You pay all their salaries." But another voice, one that had been silent for years, whispered in a tone that sounded like his father's, knowing when to step back is also a kind of courage. Jack stood. His shoulders sank, as if bearing the weight of a lifetime spent bracing against the world. He walked toward Elena slowly, then stopped just close enough not to intimidate her. "Ms. Ramirez," he said, using her name properly for the first time, not waitress, not staff. "I would like to formally invite you to serve as an advisor to Thorne Industries on this deal. If you're willing." She looked at him. No arrogance, no triumph, just a strange, quiet calm, as if things were finally falling into the order they were always meant to. Elena gave a slight nod. "I'll help. If the goal isn't just to close a deal, but to build something lasting and right." Jack nodded. No more words were needed. Across the room, Sheikh Khalid leaned back in his chair, his eyes slowly closing as if he had finally heard what he came here to hear. And the tide began to turn, not because of the loudest voices in the room, but because of the one who had always been overlooked. No longer standing in the corner, no longer wearing the hotel's cream apron, Elena now sat at the center of the conference table, a space once reserved solely for CEOs, lawyers, and seven-figure suits. In front of her were a whiteboard, a few colored markers, and dozens of eyes watching her, an expectant silence that had never before been meant for her. She didn't appear nervous, but inside, her heart pounded like a drum in a hollow chamber. She looked toward Sheikh Khalid, then back at Jack. Two men, two cultural poles, two languages, two measures of worth, and she stood between them. Not to choose sides, but to build a bridge. Elena Jack began hesitantly. "The Sheikh is requesting a quarterly performance report. I'm afraid from our shareholders' perspective that might—" "It's not a demand," Elena gently interrupted. "It's a commitment. In Arab culture, sending regular reports isn't just a financial obligation. It's a gesture of trust, like writing letters to a friend to let them know you're still walking alongside them." She turned to the Sheikh, explaining in Arabic. "From Jack's side, performance metrics aren't a sign of doubt. They are an obligation to investors, people who don't have a seat at this table. They don't see you. They only see numbers." The Sheikh gave a slight nod. Jack, meanwhile, looked at Elena as though for the first time he was truly listening. She continued, marker in hand, sketching on the whiteboard a new framework of collaboration, not just a financial chart, but a blueprint for a living relationship. "We can propose a dual structure," she said. "One side represents transparent controls by Wall Street standards, the other, a cultural advisory council reflecting the principle of Shura the Sheikh mentioned. Like two oars paddling in the same direction." The air in the room began to shift. Tension on faces slowly softened. A lawyer started typing on their laptop. A financial assistant leaned over to a colleague and nodded quietly. Jack glanced over at Eleanor and for the first time smiled, not a political smile, but one that said, "I couldn't have done this without you." Elena stepped to the board and circled the intersecting points between the two systems in blue, labeling them flex zones. Then she wrote, "Trust grows where values meet." No fanfare, no corporate slogans. But in the room that had once been a battleground of egos and assumptions, there now lingered collaboration, listening, and even unexpected smiles. And Elena, the woman once treated as a shadow, was now sketching out the future not through authority, but through her ability to turn difference into strength by building bridges. The elevator slid quietly down to the 37th floor. No background music, only the soft hum of the fan and the gentle rhythm of two breaths, each coming from opposite ends of the cabin. Jack Thorne leaned lightly against the brushed steel wall, eyes fixed on his reflection, a grey-haired man's suit, still crisp, but with eyes that had changed. No more arrogance, only honesty stripped bare. "Elena," he said, not looking at her, "I owe you an apology." She turned toward him silent, waiting for him to go on. "Not just for failing to see your talent," he continued, his voice lower than usual, "but because I looked right through you, as if you weren't even real." The elevator kept gliding, slowly stretching out a moment. Neither of them wanted to interrupt. "My father," Jack said, "used to mop the floors of buildings like this. Every night, he'd wash his janitor uniform by hand. I used to feel ashamed when he picked me up outside my school. I swore I'd escape that life, the bleach smell, the judgment in people's eyes." He lifted his head, his gaze catching Elena's reflection in the stainless steel. "And today, I became the very man I once despised, the one who thought a person's worth was measured by where they stood in a room, not what they brought into it." Elena didn't respond right away. She simply looked at him for a long moment. Then gently, she placed a hand on his arm. Not to forgive, but to bear witness to what he had just let go. "You've seen it now, Mr. Thorne," she said softly. "That's what matters." When the elevator doors opened, neither of them moved. They stood there as if needing a few seconds to step out from the shadows of their own pasts. The next day, Elena was invited to a private meeting room at the hotel. Inside, Sheikh Khalid was already waiting, not in traditional robes, but in a deep blue suit and grey tie, deliberately simple. "Ms. Ramirez," he began, "your father built structures with concrete and glass. You build with understanding and trust." He opened a small leather case and slid it across the table to her. Inside was a job offer, but more than that. "We're establishing a new branch in New York, not an investment office, a cultural bridge center for our global partners. I want you to lead it." Elena opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. At the bottom of the page, she saw her father's name, Ramirez Cultural Bridge Initiative, italicized in quiet tribute. "This isn't a job," the sheikh said. "It's a mission, a way for you to carry forward your family's legacy in a new form." Her hands trembled slightly. A single tear rolled down her cheek, not from pain, but from the deep knowing that all those silent, unseen years, the weight, the struggle, the endurance, had finally become something larger than herself. She nodded. No grand words, only the full, quiet presence of a person who had finally been seen and trusted. 1 year later, beneath the clear blue sky of New York, a massive glass tower was steadily rising along the southern edge of Central Park, a place that once held an unfinished dream, now transforming into a symbol of collaboration beyond borders. Under the gentle spring sunlight, the groundbreaking ceremony of the Legacy Project drew the attention of the media, financial elites, and even those who never thought a building could matter to them. Elena Ramirez now, Dr. Elena Ramirez, Executive Director of the Ramirez Cultural Bridge Initiative, stood at the center of the stage, flanked by Jack Thorne and Sheikh Khalid. A teal blazer, neatly tied, hair eyes calm and resolute. The sound of camera shutters echoed endlessly, yet she wasn't lost in the flash. She radiated from within. Below the stage, her mother and younger sister sat side by side, beaming teary-eyed. They held hands as Eleanor stepped up to speak in the very place where exactly a year ago she had once walked by holding a tray of coffee. This project is more than just a building, Eleanor said, her voice steady. It is a reminder that the bridges we build between people can be stronger than any financial contract, and that those who are most invisible may be the ones who bring the greatest change. After the ceremony, she returned to her new office on the 32nd floor overlooking the park, directly facing the St. Regis Hotel. On her desk sat a gift from Sheikh Khalid, a gold-trimmed fountain pen engraved with an elegant Arabic inscription. Judge the well by its water, not by the stones around it. Elena gently touched the tip of the pen, then lifted her gaze toward the city. She saw hotel staff pushing carts, a taxi driver holding the door for a passenger, a street sweeper bending to pick up a drifting newspaper. And she smiled, not the smile of victory, but the smile of someone who knew from now on she wouldn't just see them. She would make the world see them too. If this story touched you, please like, comment, and subscribe to Toch Story so you never miss the next heart-stirring tale.